Lithuania demonstrated that a non-military response can impose substantial costs on an adversary. On October 24th, Alexander Lukashenko, the authoritarian leader of Belarus, attempted a quiet hybrid operation aimed at destabilizing Lithuania, and the result was tens of millions of euros in losses and an embarrassing regional incident. This report examines how a small NATO state turned a targeted border closure into a strategic win that reshaped regional security calculations. To understand why Lithuania chose this path, consider its geography, its history, and its strategic role. Lithuania sits at a junction between the European Union/NATO and Belarus, with Russia's Kaliningrad exclave to the northwest. This position brings both importance and exposure. Policymakers in Vilnius plan as if any Russia-West confrontation could touch Lithuanian territory early. In this context, the Belarusian border functions as an early warning line and a test of resolve, particularly because Belarus, under Lukashenko, often aligns closely with the Kremlin. That alignment matters when Moscow seeks to probe NATO defenses or create deniable disruptions. The role intensified after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, when Belarus served as a staging ground for Russian troops and missiles. Despite references to sovereignty, Minsk relies on Moscow for subsidized energy, financial support, and regime security, producing a durable policy alignment with Russian priorities. Lithuania and its neighbors therefore treat small incidents as potential indicators. In 2021, scenarios that included pressure around the Suwalki Gap, the narrow corridor connecting Lithuania and Poland, appeared uncomfortably prescient once the wider war began. The latest confrontation began with balloons. On October 24th, balloons originating from Belarus, some carrying contraband such as illegal cigarettes, entered Lithuanian airspace. What first looked like smuggling took on a different character as similar incursions recurred on October 26th and 27th, many at night and near sensitive areas. Lithuania raised its alert level and tracked multiple flights. Authorities reported brief operational suspensions at Vilnius and Kaunas international airports. Investigators cited patterned launches and deliberate routing. The Prime Minister described the activity as hybrid attacks. Following emergency consultations, the government authorized the military to down any balloons crossing from Belarus. While indicators pointed to smuggling methods, the context suggested signaling and pressure. Lithuanian officials judged that the incursions served as a reminder of reach and ambiguity. Minsk likely expected the events to be treated as routine smuggling. Vilnius applied a different lens, treating the pattern as hybrid coercion. This lens is informed by a long-running context, a market worth hundreds of millions of euros that intersects with political and security concerns. Networks linked to regime-aligned industries benefit from this trade. One widely cited brand associated with production in the state-influenced Grodno tobacco sector is often labeled Minsk Capital. Estimates suggest roughly 20 billion cigarettes are produced annually there, with a significant share entering illicit flows. Each smuggled carton avoids EU excise taxes, contributing to revenue losses for EU states and financial gains for Belarus-based networks. Against this backdrop, the balloon method looked experimental and provocative. Lithuania chose not to ignore it and met the pattern with policy. After emergency meetings, the National Crisis Management Center announced an indefinite closure of several border crossings with Belarus. The move drew unusual unity in parliament. Opposition parties that typically spar over trade or tax policy supported the decision on security grounds. The Belarusian opposition in exile also voiced support. In a small state facing a larger neighbor, political cohesion became part of the deterrent. What began as a temporary measure quickly became a statement. At the Saltsinning-Kai crossing, gates were closed, and long queues of trucks built up on the Belarusian side. At Medyninkai, access was limited to diplomats, EU citizens, and NATO personnel under stringent checks. Freight flows slowed sharply or stopped. Satellite imagery showed extended lines of idle vehicles. A corridor that had carried more than 3 million tons of goods annually, timber, chemicals, machinery, and food, was effectively shuttered. Minsk introduced reciprocal transport restrictions on Lithuanian and Polish trucks. The step backfired economically for Minsk. Belarus depends heavily on Lithuanian routes to the sea, particularly via the Port of Klaipėda, which handles a large share of Belarus's external cargo. With roads constrained, exports backed up, shipping windows were missed, and some logistics firms reported weekly losses exceeding 1.2 million euros. In the first week, officials counted roughly 2,000 stranded trucks. Within 2 weeks of the October 24th announcement, disruptions exceeded 50 million euros within 2 weeks, and roughly 40% of Lithuania's freight links with Belarus were affected. Border communities near Medininkai and the Salsininkai area lost passing trade, while carriers rerouted via Poland and Latvia, raising costs. Insurance premiums reportedly rose by about 20%, and some smaller haulers reduced staff. The relative burden, however, fell more heavily on Belarus, where close to 1/3 of exports relied on Lithuanian corridors. Drivers on the Belarusian side faced protracted waits, and Russian routes, longer and less predictable, became one of the few alternatives. The ripple spread along Eurasian logistics. Segments traversing Belarus, and, on some routings, Lithuania, recorded delays of up to a week in some cases, prompting several firms to favour routes via Poland and Latvia to reduce risk. Insurers adjusted rates for Belarus-linked itineraries, while shippers increasingly treated EU internal Lithuanian routes as more reliable alternatives. To cushion domestic impact, the Lithuanian government in Vilnius rolled out targeted relief, tax measures, small grants for transport firms, and incentives to pivot toward EU internal routes, while affirming a guiding principle: sovereignty first, trade second. Strategically, the effects extended beyond immediate costs. The closure became a case study in how a small state can raise the price of hybrid tactics. Latvia, Estonia, and Poland accelerated surveillance coordination and physical measures under the emerging Baltic Defence Line concept, designed for early warning against drones, balloons, and other cross-border incursions. The European Commission acknowledged economic downsides, but praised Lithuania's decisiveness. The episode reinforced a deterrent logic. Clear red lines reduced the utility of ambiguity. Public opinion in Lithuania held steady behind the decision. Citizens had seen pressure before: Belarus's weaponization of migration in 2021, and the presence of Wagner elements in Belarus in 2023. The method changed. The objective, disruption, remained familiar. Treating the balloons as part of a broader hybrid threat, Lithuania opted for visible, rules-based responses rather than incremental accommodation. By acting quickly and publicly, Vilnius undercut the deniability that hybrid operations often rely upon. Each delayed truck and closed gate highlighted Belarus's role, and by association, alignment with Russian interests. Analysts noted that while Lithuania paid a near-term price, its strategic credibility improved. In an environment where Russia remains committed in Ukraine and faces sanctions pressure, opening new lines of confrontation carries risk. A firm response by a small NATO member shifted the calculus toward caution. As of November 2025, the shutdown remained in effect without a set reopening date. Officials indicated it could continue into 2026 if provocations persist. The choice set for Minsk is narrow: ease off at reputational cost, or sustain pressure while absorbing economic strain. With each passing week, trucks idle, cargo spoils, and routes bend around Belarus, transforming a short-term disruption into a longer rewiring of trade. Belarus can still apply friction, slower customs, tighter inspections, and logistics hurdles, and can pursue digital tactics. Lithuania, however, strengthened its posture by working through NATO channels, including cooperation with the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, CCD. Authorities reported that while suspected cyber probes against the freight sector increased in October, most were blocked. Some economic impact was still recorded. In Belarus, reliance on access through Klaipėda has raised concerns among investors, and local reports from industrial centers such as Grodno have noted unease over wages and schedules. Moscow, meanwhile, is likely to weigh lower visibility options: fuel pricing, disinformation, and pre-election influence operations ahead of Lithuania's 2026 vote, rather than overt escalation. The episode exposed a weakness in the playbook. When targets respond rapidly and in concert with allies, the leverage of ambiguity declines. Trade patterns continue to adjust. If the border remains closed, flows will keep shifting through Poland, Latvia, and Finland. The Port of Klaipėda Authority projects additional throughput growth by 2027 as shippers bypass Belarus entirely. China has also signaled a reliability-first approach, exploring alternatives. In September 2025, Beijing entered talks with Poland to expand capacity at the Malasovice rail hub as a gateway to the EU. Each adjustment marginally reduces Moscow's grip on trans-Eurasian corridors. Defense lessons are straightforward. Hybrid pressure meets deterrence when responses are clear, collective, and immediate. NATO has been tightening its northeastern posture with enhanced sensors, air defenses, and faster response units. Finland, citing Baltic experiences, increased drone patrols along its long border with Russia. The wider message is that the Baltic states and their partners will not simply absorb pressure, they will answer it within legal and alliance frameworks. For Lithuania, the coming months are a test of endurance, sustaining the border policy, managing economic side effects, and maintaining public support, recently reported around 68%, while refining mitigations. The government has discussed a limited, monitored corridor via Latvia to ease pressure on specific freight categories without reopening the main crossings. More broadly, the case underscores that hybrid threats do not require armies to be dangerous, and that they do not require armies to be countered. Clarity, coordination, and political cohesion can blunt coercion and, in some cases, reverse it. What began with a handful of drifting balloons evolved into a blueprint for deterrence by a small state. The core lesson is simple. In an era of grey zone competition, resolve, applied early and in concert with allies, can change the balance.